races and racism's origins. During the Enlightenment, the idea of race was deliberately created to give systemic exploitation, slavery, and global colonialism a false scientific look. European intellectuals tried to put people into hierarchical groups by turning flexible social biases into rigid taxonomies. This intellectual shift was not just an academic exercise, it was a planned way to make the removal of indigenous people and the horrible practice of chattel slavery seem normal. By framing these socio-political actions within the language of natural science, proponents of these theories successfully insulated their economic and political power from moral scrutiny, creating a legacy of division that persists well into the modern era of 2026. Historical roots and early grouping. The process of racialization started long before the official definitions of the 18th century. As European empires grew in the 1500s and 1600s, they came into contact with people from many different backgrounds in the Americas and Africa. To deal with these situations, and more importantly, to explain why these groups were lower in status, European powers started to build identity frameworks that set them apart from the other. During this early stage, people used religious and conquest-based definitions of superiority more than biological ones. But as the age of discovery turned into the age of enlightenment, it became more important to have a more structured, objective reason for keeping colonial expansion going. The Enlightenment, which is often praised for its focus on reason and questioning, was actually a great time for these classification systems to grow. Naturalists were obsessed with making the natural world more uniform, and in their rush to put plants and animals into groups, they naturally turned their attention to people. By the middle of the 1700s, the push to classify changed from just describing things to putting them in a strict hierarchical order. This time was important because it marked the shift from localized prejudice to a formalized, institutionalized science of human difference, which led to centuries of inequality. The function of Enlightenment naturalists. The formalization of racial science is significantly attributed to the efforts of distinguished naturalists who aimed to standardize human variation. Their efforts were not only descriptive, they were also prescriptive, implying that variations in appearance required corresponding disparities in status and treatment. Carl Linnaeus's taxonomy in 1758, Carl Linnaeus added humans to his larger system of classification. By putting people into certain varieties, he set the stage for later scientists to give these groups both physical and moral traits, which effectively made inequality a part of the biological sciences of the time. In 1775, Johann Friedrich Blumenbach made this idea even stronger by suggesting 5 different types of people. His work was a clear reference point for people of his time, turning guesswork into a framework that seemed to be beyond doubt and put the white race at the top of the list of what it means to be human. The impact of Georges Buffon, Georges de Buffon, and other thinkers helped make the idea that human variation was not just due to the environment, but was also deeply rooted in the nature of different populations more widely accepted. This gave colonial rulers more intellectual weapons to use. The degeneration theory and pseudo-science. As the 18th century turned into the 19th, the search for racial stratification became more and more desperate, which led to the rise of what is now known as dangerous pseudo-science. Degeneration theory, which first appeared around 1750, was a key idea of this time. This theory said that humans had an original better form, which was usually the same as the European population, and that other groups were degenerating from this peak in different ways. This idea was dangerous because it used biology to explain why non-European people were thought to be inferior, making it seem like a natural state that couldn't be changed instead of a social construct. These underlying biases made scientific research very difficult during this time. Researchers focused on anatomical measurements, particularly craniometry, which examines skull size and shape. These early scientists tried to back up their hierarchical views by saying that the size of the skull was directly related to intelligence and morality. This focus was inherently circular. The metrics they chose were based on their initial bias, which in turn proved the bias they brought to the table. This cycle of bad reasoning gave slavers and colonizers a handy excuse for their actions, letting them say that they were based on objective scientific findings instead of greed or political power. The socio-political implications of categorization. The real reason these scientific frameworks were made was to protect and grow economic interest. The enslavement of Africans and the systematic displacement of indigenous peoples necessitated a moral and philosophical justification capable of enduring the ascendant democratic ideals of the era. The intellectual elite made a mental gap between themselves and the people they exploited by putting people into types or subspecies. This dehumanization was necessary to keep the global power structures the way they were. Strategic dehumanization, the process of classifying colonized people, took away their individuality and agency, turning them into biological categories that colonial administrators could manage, buy, or throw away. Standardization of inequality. By creating a false sense of scientific agreement, these frameworks made structural racism seem legal and normal, making it seem like inequality was a part of nature rather than something that was created by people. Institutionalizing power. These ideas became part of the fabric of schools, laws, and public policy, making sure that the ideas of the Enlightenment would live on for many years. Final thoughts. To sum up, the racial classification that came about in the 1700s was never a neutral or purely scientific process. Instead, it was a planned, top-down construction meant to make the harsh truths of colonialism and slavery seem okay. By using the Enlightenment scientific method to make a hierarchical taxonomy of human types, supporters of these theories were able to make social inequalities that were based on exploitation rather than biological truth even stronger. It is important to know where this idea came from in order to understand how the long-lasting structures of racial inequality in the modern world were first built on false scientific reasons